Hey everybody, it's Mike Johnson here in the audio section of pwinsider.com. We're going to make this free for everybody, so if you're not a member of the elite section, check us out. You can join us for 3 days free and hear lots of audio similar to the one we are going to conduct right now. And I feel like we should play like the Law and Order music, because the ongoing legal issues between the Hardy Clan and Anthem Media / Impact Wrestling continue to boil up, and it's getting uglier and uglier by the day. Ed Nordholm last night released a statement and what was claimed to be an excerpt of Matt Hardy's contract, as well as some communication between WWE and Anthem Media. Obviously, Matt and Reby Hardy have fired back via social media, as is the norm in 21st century, about the situation. And it's obvious this is going to come to some sort of legal head at some point. So I thought it would be very interesting to bring on Billy Corgan, former TNA president, obviously well-versed in the world of professional wrestling, also well-versed when it comes to creating content, frontman of the Smashing Pumpkins, and songwriter, poet, author, etc., and obviously has had at times a tumultuous relationship with Impact / Anthem, although that's all settled now. So Billy, I kind of wanted to bring you on here and get your take on the whole situation and get some insight from your perspective of someone who creates content, as to just to kind of sift through all this. So before we start that, I just want to say hello and thanks for coming on at such short notice.
Yeah, no problem. I think it also bears pointing out, although it's not yet public knowledge, that I was approached by Anthem to kind of help mediate the situation, and Matt and Jeff signed off on me sort of negotiating on their behalf. So I've been sort of the back channel negotiator for the past week or so, trying to resolve this situation. And I think, though it's not where anybody wants it to be, I think at least it's a little bit more clarified, and that's without going into the details of it. But I'm not here to necessarily talk about the negotiation as much as maybe help everybody involved, who's paid attention and is interested in how this thing will play out, kind of bring a little bit more of a real world, the real world of contracts and the real world of IP, as they say, intellectual property, having faced these issues myself in my own career, but also having been involved with Impact on the creative side. And as you've seen from some of the Anthem stuff, they cite me as one of the authors of the Broken World or Broken Gimmick, although, my role is certainly a lot less than, say, Jeremy Borash and Matt Hardy.
So, this is why I love pro wrestling. 6 months ago, you and Impact were fighting with each other in a legal sense, and now there's members of Impact coming to you and saying, hey, can you kind of help us sort of tread the waters and mediate this because it's getting bad? And this is why I love wrestling. The landscape never stops shifting, Like, it starts out as Pangea, and then it shifts to the 7 continents.
Sorry, but the silver lining here, I think, and what I'd like to point out is, as contentious as my negotiations were with Impact on my way out the door, I was able to not only find resolution, but I've actually been able to build a bit of a relationship with them on the back end, to where, they trusted me enough to sort of come to me and say, can you try to help us with this, because this is obviously not where we want it to be.
Well, I think that's an understatement, because I feel like the entire Hardy situation overshadowed Anthem's reboot of the company and taking it in a new direction, and whatever sort of automatic goodwill they would have had with the exit of Dixie Carter and the entrance of Jeff Jarrett and the new direction that they were going in. I think the ugliness of the Hardy situation sort of almost put the fire out before they could get it going to some fans. So, as someone who's created intellectual property before of your own, and someone who knows the way that Impact operates, what's your stance on all this? Because traditionally, whether it be the comic book industry or the pro wrestling industry, when Impact last night in the contract they issued and showed to everybody, they mentioned that Matt Hardy worked for the company under a deal which is pretty standard in professional wrestling, where any original new intellectual property that you create while working for this company is not yours, but the company's. It's a situation where I'm hiring you to work to create and perform, and whatever you create and perform under our auspices, we automatically own, you don't. And Matt Hardy obviously has a different stance on this, and Rebbe Hardy yesterday said that the contract that Impact released is not the final contract that Matt signed. Perhaps you have some insight into that. Perhaps you can't go into that. I don't know. But what's your stance on all this as someone who has insight into all sides but has no dog in the fight, so to speak?
Right. I think, generally speaking, in the entertainment world, in the music world, we call it a work for hire. But the idea is if I pay you $100 a day, if you write, Hey Jude, I own Hey Jude. It doesn't matter that you wrote it. It doesn't matter that it was your idea. It doesn't matter that you came up with the video. And so that's sort of the argument that Anthem stands on. And they cite, of course, lots of precedent where there is any kind of work for hire. And I've certainly done work for hire myself. So I can empathize with their position from the standpoint of, look, we hired you to do this. We don't deny that you're the author of this property with other people. And they've obviously cited Matt Conway, David Lagana, and Jeremy Borash. But what am I trying to get at? So the point is they say, look, hey, great, good job, but we own it. And in Anthem's mind, and they've stated this publicly, so I'm not giving anything away. They believe that it's theirs to own. They're not trying to deny the Hardys the authorship to the extent that say that Matt didn't create these things or do these things. They just say that based on the contractual law that they have in front of them, they own the properties. And of course they point to, WWE does the same thing with talents. And then we see situations where like Cody Rhodes is not able to use the Rhodes name and things like that. So that's the sort of general ley lines by which Anthem is making their public argument, like kind of a don't blame us for a contract that a talent signed. And this is across the board. And I also would point out to Anthem's position, look, this goes beyond whether or not this situation works for the Hardy brothers. They have a whole roster that they have to sort of keep precedent on. So they can't necessarily make concessions just because one talent wants this and one talent wants that. They probably, in their minds, have some sort of company line, like this is the line we're going to take, because if we move this line, then we're opening up a can of worms or a Pandora's box that is far more complicated down the road.
Right. It'd be like Marvel Comics saying, all right, you have the rights to Captain America, but Thor and the X-Men and the Hulk, nope, those are ours. And obviously the next creator that comes along that creates something is going to say, no, but you did this for X. You started that precedent. Now,
exactly.
Now, from the Hardy standpoint, the argument seems to be we made all these concessions to Impact, which at the time wasn't even owned by Anthem. And Senor Benjamin wasn't paid. King Maxwell was on the show and wasn't paid. We allowed our property to be used. We put money in for the production. At some point, doesn't that, by the letter of the law, perhaps, maybe or maybe not, doesn't that give them a greater claim to what they've produced or maybe ownership in what they helped produce?
Right, and then that's you're very accurate in the way the Hardys approach the other side of the IP argument. You can't read this contract based on the letter of the law. You have to look at there are extenuating circumstances that would maybe augment the enforcement or application of this contract as it relates to IP. So there is where and I hope I'm helping anybody who's on the sidelines, sort of interested in this, can see. This is where the thing sort of breaks down. It's sort of like nobody's 100% right and nobody's 100% wrong.
So you've sort of, you just mentioned you're kind of helping to mediate this. Do you feel they've gotten, and I don't want you to go too much into this because then you're going to almost betray both sides here, but do you feel like they're getting closer to a goalpost here, or do you feel like they're just dropping nuclear bombs on each other and this is getting worse by the minute? Because from the outside looking in, it looks to be a lot worse today than it was a week ago.
That's a difficult question to answer because, at the end of the day, when I settled my issues with Anthem, I, of course, didn't get everything I wanted. what makes a successful negotiation isn't necessarily that everybody gets everything they want, or that's not a negotiation, but that everybody walks away from the table and says, okay, that's fair. And I think that at least through the part of it where I was involved, I think both sides at least got closer to understanding what the other side wanted. And sometimes that, even though that maybe is not working to anybody's benefit today, that ultimately may help bring this thing to a resolution, because compromise is a funny thing depending on, the day and the moment. I certainly, as somebody from the outside, don't like seeing, how can I put it? I think if you're a Hardy fan, you certainly can appreciate and the passion, because how important this creation is, particularly to Matt Hardy. On the other side, it's not just a fight between Matt, Jeff, and Rebby and Anthem. It affects the roster. It affects people's ability to enjoy the product, and by extension, I know that also grieves Matt, because he doesn't want to hurt the talent in the locker room by extension. So it's a difficult situation. And then, of course, when it spills into the public component, it gets even more complicated, because then people who don't understand the sophistication of this kind of contract language or how it plays out in terms of the spirit of the contract start piling on and saying things that really don't have any relevance to a real world compromise and solution.
Now, one of the arguments that someone with an impact has made to me is that the creation of the Broken Brilliance is no different than a number of songwriters writing a song for an artist, and the songwriters would then each own a share of that creativity. My argument back to them has been, yes, but no one's getting royalties on pro wrestling. So do you think the songwriting argument holds up, that you, Borash, Lagana, Conway, Hardy, whoever, all own a piece of this, if there's not some sort of royalty coming from the content?
I think that's a really specious argument to make for a variety of reasons. A, it opens the door that if 20 years from now we're still looking at the Broken Universe as a viable property, why wouldn't I, Matt Conway, David Lagana, Jeremy Borash come back and sue the company and say that our work for hires didn't cover this type of benefit? Certainly, look, Mike Love of the Beach Boys sued Brian Wilson, who was considered, the genius and main songwriter of the Beach Boys, 30 years after the fact, and said he wrote California Girls, and he eventually came to a settlement. So just because somebody agrees to something, just because somebody, signs something, doesn't mean that the law will always side on the end of the agreement, because there can be other extenuating circumstances. Pressure can be part of it, breach of contract in other ways, as was very publicly stated at the time, and certainly I was there when this was happening. Talents weren't being paid on time. The Hardys certainly went out of pocket on a lot of expenses related to it, so maybe they thought that they would receive a different type of benefit in leaving, or they were given a different allowance. They were certainly encouraged, and I was part of the encouragement that they were given free rein to create. No one ever pulled them aside that I ever saw and said, hey, by the way, even though you're creating this wonderful thing, you don't own it, or and that gets deeper into the negotiation stuff. But again, I think people can appreciate why maybe it's not as cut and dry as the contract says this, and you must, it gets into people's state of mind, people's aspirational belief. Other precedents, certainly, and I don't mean to put this on Anthem because they bought a company, but the company that was TNA before Anthem, Kurt Angle came in, so he changed one word of his catchphrase, and that was okay. Were they not stealing on some level WWE intellectual property there?
Bully Ray, the Bully Ray character was created under the auspices of TNA, but he owns the trademark and copyright on that. So, that right there is that setting precedent that characters that were created in TNA, that the performers can turn around and copyright those characters.
That's exactly my point is, and I've experienced this many times, and I can only rely on my own experience in the entertainment business. Yes, the contract says one thing, and of course the person who holds the contract has every right to say, look, this is the contract I have, and this is the contract I'm enforcing. But there can be other extenuating circumstances, including precedent. So it's very reasonable to assume, with as loose a ship as TNA was before Anthem bought it, that particular talents could have believed certain things, and if they'd known otherwise, they maybe would have approached a gimmick or a creation of a gimmick or the trademarking of a gimmick in a totally different manner. So those are extenuating circumstances that might create, let's call it a gray area, which then in terms of a negotiation or some sort of settlement, is not, this is the way it is and there's no flexibility. And of course, and I don't think I'm giving anything away by saying that's some of the things that I was trying to argue in both directions. Because I really feel in this particular case, I am a neutral party, because at the end of the day, I think it's to Anthem's benefit to get out from under this cloud. And I would call it a cloud because it does on some level hurt the product overall. And then by extension, I think fans and myself would like to see the Hardys be able to continue to explore these characters to their fullest, because whether they're in WWE or they're on the indies in 10 years, I think they should have every right to sort of fulfill the possibility of what these characters pretend. And certainly they never got to the end of that, people weren't tired of the broken gimmick by the end of the TNA run. I mean, it feels like a series you're watching, and after, it gets canceled, but you never got to the finish.
Yeah. As someone who was TNA president and wanted to buy the company, would you have handled the Hardy situation similar to how Ed Nordholm handled yesterday, releasing a portion of the contract and communication with WWE and such publicly? What's your take on that?
I think I would have handled the leaving quite different if I reached a situation where the Hardys were going to leave, and certainly Impact Wrestling faces, the Leviathan of WWE in terms of resources. So there are decisions that maybe you would make in that situation that every company would make. And I don't mean this as criticism, I just would have viewed it as ultimately I would have taken more slings and arrows by denying it than sort of standing for it. And so I probably would have negotiated some sort of exit settlement that allowed the Hardys to continue accepting that I wouldn't necessarily, or the company wouldn't necessarily benefit from the gimmick in the way that I would hope, but in exchange, maybe get some concessions from the Hardys that would allow me to kind of create some goodwill, keep the door open to the Hardys coming back someday. Because there's certainly, at least in my time there, and it was talked about many times in the office, Jeff Hardy in particular was someone, was probably one of the only talents that could actually move the needle in terms of ratings. So considering the long history there, considering that the broken gimmick was born in TNA, I would look at it as a sort of a longer term play, like maybe the Hardys can come back someday, or maybe I can get some things from the Hardys on the way out the door that will kind of allow the goodwill and kind of just move, turn the page, like take it as a bit of a loss, but like maybe mitigate the loss by getting some things in return. But that's a different management style than it's, a lot of people would say that's not wise, because you have to keep the precedent, and you have to hold people to their contracts based on the letter of the law. And I think that's where it does get a little bit blurry. And I have tried to indicate, on behalf of the Hardys to the Anthem brass, when I've talked to more than one person in the structure there, that it's hard if you weren't there during that era to understand maybe the state of mind. So it's, yes, you can point to a contract, but you can't necessarily understand the state of mind if you weren't there. And obviously, being part of the office, I could speak very directly to what I saw as the talent understanding at any given time.
Are you still going to be involved in trying to mediate this going forward, or or even by virtue of doing this interview, are you stepping out of that role?
I think I probably don't have much of a role to play. I think, unfortunately, it's going to go more of a legal route at this point, which is unfortunate. I wished I'd been more helpful. And at the end of the day, if it is resolved and I was able to play a part in it getting resolved, great. I don't have an ego in the thing or a dog in the fight. I think at the end of the day, it's to everybody's benefit that this gets settled. And I would encourage anybody who's a fan of Anthem or the Hardys to try to at least take a little bit more of a sophisticated look at how this thing's going to play out, because it's not really at this moment beneficial to both sides. And the fact that it has to go to the next level in terms of the lawyers and maybe at some point even the courts, as I would say to everybody involved, be careful what you wish for, because when you get down that road, you don't know what's going to happen.
No.
And certainly when I was in my legal squabble with Anthem, I was warned many times, be careful, which left turn you take, because this thing could blow up. In my situation, it was constantly under threat of bankruptcy. I was constantly told that maybe I wouldn't get my money back. Certainly, Anthem insinuated at different times that, maybe I wouldn't get my investment back. That becomes all part of a bigger thing. I think the unfortunate thing here is Anthem, if they so choose, doesn't have to release this gimmick ever, and maybe you can look at that however you want from the perspective of a fan or an observer of the wrestling business. But I mean, Anthem does not have to ever release this gimmick. And I think it's obviously publicly acknowledged that unless they do that, certainly the Hardys would never be able to use the gimmick in the WWE.
That is certainly the case. I know we're starting to run out of the time that we have allotted. Before we go, National Wrestling Alliance. Why are you purchasing this thing, and where does it stand?
Well, I don't really want to get too deep into the why yet, because we're still setting up a business plan, and unfortunately the deal's not 100% complete. We're about 97% there. It's complicated legally. But certainly once the thing is done and we start being able to make some business moves, we'll kind of set the thing up publicly with some sort of press release and a few interviews to set the context. And I think then we'll be pointing to a sort of an official launch down the road. So, we can sort of say this is when the new era of the NWA will begin. But certainly we're looking at it as the 21st century brand and a way to create wrestling that is unlike anything that's in the marketplace at the moment. And we think that the history feeds quite nicely into that idea. So, but until we're able to really present those ideas clearly into a world that's obviously, 21st century social media, everything's moving at 1,000 miles an hour, less is more.
All right. Well, I guess once the deal is done and the ink is dry, you'll be able to talk a little bit more about that. It probably wouldn't be opportune to speak about it not opportune to speak about the baby before it's born.
Yeah, I really look forward to it. I mean, we're really excited. David Lagana, formerly of Impact TNA, is in business with me, as is Jay Bradley. If anybody, he was also Aiden O'Shea in TNA, and a couple other people in the business are my partners going in. And Sherry Shaw, who is she's sitting next to me, so she just threw her hands up in exasperation because I didn't mention it. She'll be involved as well. But thanks so much for asking about it.
All right. Well, I appreciate it, and obviously when things are set and done, ready to go, we are more than happy to sit down with you and talk about that. And I'm looking forward to it because when I was a kid, and you and I are about the same age. When you were young, the NWA meant something. And nobody would be happier than me, and I think I speak for a lot of fans, in seeing that name kind of come back to prominence in some way, shape, or form. And it can never be 6:05 on Saturday nights on TBS ever again. That time is long gone, but it can be something that would hopefully be the equivalent of that in the 21st century. Well,
I hate to argue with you, but this is one thing I can point out. I have seen a real change in traditional broadcasters looking at professional wrestling again with a fresh eye because of so much cord cutting and people now going to the internet to get their television viewing. So don't be so sure that the former partners in the wrestling business, as far as the television side, aren't open to wrestling making a bigger return to traditional broadcast television. I don't be so quick to jump to those conclusions.
Well, nothing would make me happier than to be wrong in that one, because I like watching wrestling, and I certainly need more reasons to sit in front of my computer and my television. So
Awesome.
I want to thank you again for coming on board with us for a little bit and talking to us. Everybody can follow Billy on Twitter @Billy, very simple, and I'm sure we'll be talking more about your inroads with the NWA hopefully very soon. And I appreciate you coming on and giving some of your insight into the Hardy and Anthem situation.
Awesome. Okay, talk soon. Thanks, Mike.
All right, take care, Billy, and I want to thank all of you for listening to this interview. Until next time, I'm Mike Johnson.